Before I introduced myself to the world, I was taught to hold myself within it. I learned to greet, to kneel, to lower my voice without being asked. Just like any proper African girl, I learned restraint before I learned ambition. And for a long time, I wondered whether this restraint was shaping me or shrinking me. Growing up in a Nigerian household, I'm sure you can recognize prints like this. It's a norm in a Nigerian household, as was restraint. You see, we didn't see it as weakness, but as practice, norm, habitual even. It lived in the way you entered a room, the way you carefully observed before you spoke, the way you carefully measured your presence before announcing it. Tradition wasn't something abstract or distant. It was embodied, residing in the small, repetitive actions that slowly taught you who you were supposed to be. You greeted the elders properly. You watched how people older than you carried themselves. You learned to exist within a community before learning how to exist apart from it. And these weren't dramatic lessons. They were subtle ones, yet they shaped us all the same. But at the same time, I was growing up in a world that celebrates visibility, a world that tells young people to stand out, speak up, take up space, a world that rewards boldness, quick opinions, loud confidence. And in the space between boldness and restraint, I began to feel the tension. Was I being shaped? Or was I being contained? Because when you're young, it's easy to assume that anything quiet must also be smooth. That anything restrained must also be restrictive. And then I took the traditions I had grown up with as barriers rather than beginnings. And from there, I misunderstood myself. I assumed if I was not constantly asserting myself, I must surely be falling behind, causing me to subconsciously liken my roots to limits. This is a novel that is very dear to me. I'm sure you've read it or seen it somewhere. For the many who have read it would recognize the story of a girl who, due to the death of her abusive, authoritarian father, blossomed, found herself, and became the person she truly needed herself to be. But what I recognized was something I had not yet found the language for. The confusion between silence and weakness, between obedience and fragility, between shaping and shrinking. Because sometimes what looks like silence is not emptiness. Sometimes it is observation. Sometimes it is patience. Sometimes it is preparation. And what I realized was this. Restraint is not the absence of strength. It is controlled strength. And looking at it like this, something shifted. The very thing I once questioned was quietly building my foundation. The roots I had once feared were keeping me small, were actually giving me something to rise from. They taught me balance, perspective, self-control. And I know I'm not alone in this realization. Across Nigeria, across the world, young people like myself are navigating this same balance. We carry traditions older than ourselves, expectations that sometimes seem too heavy to bear, Stories, customs, values that have shaped generations before us. But we also carry innovation, ambition, creativity. For a while, I thought growth meant distance. Distance from tradition, distance from expectation, distance from anything that felt too restraining or repressing. It seemed easier to picture progress as a departure, as leaving certain things behind in order to move forward. But what if growth isn't about distance? What if it's about understanding? Understanding what shaped us, understanding what strengthened us, understanding what is worth carrying forward. Because the truth is, roots are not meant to keep us small. They're meant to give us something to rise from. Because progress is not proven by how loudly we assert ourselves, but by whether we can grow without forgetting what steadied us in the first place. So perhaps the real challenge for our generation is not to choose between roots or wings, but to grow in a manner that one never has to erase the other. To recognize that tradition does not have to imprison us. To fly without forgetting what steadied us in the first place. Because sometimes what seems to be keeping us small is quietly building our futures. Thank you.